Welcome to Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. An e-zine of the Futures Forum live online. We exchange ideas, information, and inspiration about the futures we want. Get Future Sense Now with host Dr. Claire Nelson, futurist and editor of Human Futures.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. It's April 2020, and around the world in the last few days, we have been celebrating things like UN Creativity and Innovation Day, and Earth Day, and of course, we're celebrating in this conversation, Girls in ICT Day. This year, we commemorate the day in a very challenging time globally, amidst a global pandemic. As a result, we at the Futures Forum would like to explore these global commemorations through the lens of the future of sustainability with a focus on girls in ICT. We will look out at the year 2030 because despite the immediate challenges of the day, it is my belief that we need now more than ever a shared vision of our aspirations as defined through Agenda 2030. And we want to deal with gender equality, inequality, and of course, ICT being seen as a human right, especially now that we need it to do so many things. In this episode, I'll be speaking with SANDRA GARCIA LOWERY, and she is CEO of Encounter Your Potential, a branding and marketing strategist. And in this capacity, she has among her clients many big name organizations such as Howard University School of Divinity and Vivo, and she is a Google digital coach. So that's how most people know her. But anyway, the fact is she has so much to share with us. I'd like to welcome to this conversation, SANDRA GARCIA LOWERY. How are you?
I'm good. It is Wednesday, so it's the middle of the week. So this is that point of the week where we're still getting a lot done. We're also looking at the finish line, which is Friday and the weekend.
Good. I'm so glad to have you join us. I know you're very busy. You're very much out there speaking a lot on conferences. You are out there as a strategist for companies, small and large. As a digital coach, you're working with small businesses to teach them about how to use technology. And as we think about 2030 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I want you to not just look out at the horizon for the time being. I know we're kind of all like, but look at the horizon for the time being and tell me, as you're looking out in the next 10 years and what we're going to have to go through and navigate in the next 2 years, are you thinking that based on your work and what you're seeing and what you know is happening in the industry, are you seeing that we might actually be converging or getting on the road towards a place where girls and women will actually be, more involved in this industry, in ICT industry? Will disparity be less by 2030? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there is a greater consciousness. There are conversations happening like today's conversation. There are conversations that took place and that should continue to take place during Women's History Month. So because there is awareness around it and there are conversations, I think that is now taking the steps to be able to close that gap. Now, what we need is action. We need action. We need access. We need education. We need our girls to feel more confident, prepared, encouraged in order to really make greater moves towards closing that gap, getting closer and closer to 2030. So I'm confident that it can be closed, that it will be very equal. Who knows? Things can happen. We didn't know that we would be impacted by the coronavirus. 5 months ago, coming into 2020, we had no idea this is what we would be living through. So something else could happen that could change things monumentally. We don't know what that is, but in that there's a possibility, there's a lot of time. So anything can happen. But what I think is necessary is action and education.
So in that regard, your company, Encounter Your Potential, really is about doing digital strategies for companies. Tell me about, first of all, the response to you as, well, in the American context, as a minority woman, as an Afro-Latina, as people would call you, coming from Central America, Honduras. So that's one unexpected thing. Do you find that you are usually the only you in the room? How have you been received by, let's say, mainstream people in this sector of industry?
Yeah. So I call myself a super minority, but I've been a super minority since I was born. So I was born in Honduras, Central America. My first language was Spanish. I moved to the US when I was 5 in time for elementary school. I learned to speak English at school. I grew up in New York City, which, yes, is a melting pot of different cultures, but I've been a walking question mark since people can ask me questions, because I'm 100% Latina, but I am not what you expect in a Hispanic woman. So I show up, my race is, I'm Black, I'm Afro-Latina, my ethnicity, I am Hispanic. So there are already questions to be answered there. Or, you know, my first language is Spanish, but I'm not feeling Hispanic enough, Latina enough. What does that even mean? Or growing up in New York, or you're not Black, like you're that, but you don't fit anywhere. Right? So I think for me, I had a higher sense of consciousness from the very beginning. So growing into myself, from middle school to high school to college to going into my professional career, I was already comfortable with not necessarily fitting any kind of mold, but creating a space for myself. That's why I'm a big believer in confidence. Because if you're able to learn confidence early on, you don't need to belong. You don't need to look like everybody else in the room. You just need to get the job done. Be the best ever at what you do. I don't want to be the best Latina. I don't want to be the best Black person, the best whatever anyone wants to call me on any given day. I don't want to be the best woman at it. I just want to be really great at whatever it is. And in any room, in any space that I step in, I just want to be remembered. So there, of course, have been many circumstances where I have been the only person of color, the only woman, but I don't lead into the room with that. Gotcha. I lead into the room with, hi, I'm Sandra, and this is what I do. So there, and that was self-development, and that had to be built up over time. That didn't just come, but of course, I've been hyper conscious of my status of a super minority from a very young age. And I think that I was able to see it as an advantage and not a liability. I come to the table with already questions for you. You have questions for me, and I have the answer. I can educate you on perspective. And because I'm able to swim between worlds, I'm able to see life through different lenses. I can see life as a woman. I can see life from the perspective of being Carib. I can see life through the Hispanic perspective, being multilingual. And it makes me conscious when I also travel the world. I'm open and curious to people behavior, which is what makes me a good marketer as well, because you need to be curious and need to be inspired in igniting action in other people. So I say that my life experience has prepared me for a world of not really fitting in. And really, again, I'm just going to repeat that it really has a lot to do with confidence, having the confidence, because you should never, I don't say, maybe not never, but that shouldn't be what you lead with. Walking into a room as a minority and seeing it as a disadvantage, in fact, is a huge advantage. It's a skill set because you already have different perspectives.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you talked about confidence, because I note that you have done a lot of work in different, like say, professional organizations. And no doubt in some of those organizations, as well as in your capacity as a digital coach, you're working with people who are in industry as professionals, but also as entrepreneurs. Tell me about some of the entrepreneurs that you're working with, the women and the young women in particular, who see themselves as being in business in this digital economy that you have come across, and how are you helping to shape how that system and ecosystem works?
Yeah, I think that being a minority just comes with social responsibility. So I find that there's multi-layers of whatever it is that you're doing, because you're never just doing the task. You're also representing something, whether you want to or you're not, or you don't. We're representing something. So one thing I was very conscious of when I left corporate America to run my own business is that I was in a decision-making position. So being in a decision-making position and also knowing the disparities in terms of access to jobs, to all these things, I was now in a position to hire people that looked like me. So being able to work with women and being able to work with women who supported me and who I felt I was in a mentoring position for at one stage of life, but now in my second stage of life, I can hire you. I can employ you. And then also, in addition to that, in corporate America, I was working on big business, for big businesses, making even more money. And in my entrepreneurial capacity, what I saw is that a lot of smaller businesses had passion, had love, but sometimes the business savvy and strategy was missing. And not just that, but you drill it down further, it was our minority, our Black and brown owned businesses that were suffering the most. So I wanted to be able to help. So that's one of the things that I am so very passionate about now, working with Black and brown people. Whether I am being contracted by a large organization is usually in connection to being able to serve from a diversity, equity, and inclusion capacity, or if I'm serving small businesses, it's usually minority-owned businesses, helping them to strategize and use marketing to ultimately drive sales. Good marketing drives sales, and a lot of times we're not planning our marketing and we're not seeing the connection between marketing and the bigger picture, which is the product or the service that we're selling. So when things like Corona happen, we're impacted because we're not prepared. We don't have a strategy.
Yeah.
And when you don't have a strategy, you don't know what to pivot because you don't know what's in front of you to begin with. So when we have an actual strategy for our business, things may happen. It might be a storm and there's a water leak, right? Corona is a huge water leak in our businesses. But if you have a strategy, you can figure out what needs to change, what you need to alter, what you need to just forget about and maybe come back to in 2 years. But when you have nothing and you're just operating.
Yeah, but I was going to say, because right now, a lot of people have had to pivot to a digital strategy. So the question is, were they digitally literate in the first place, or how are you coaching women, especially who have a fear around this? I mean, is there like, is the ecosystem strong enough, and what needs to happen so that more small businesses are able to recover in this world that we're going to be moving into? How do you see it playing out in terms of the system that has to change for small businesses?
Yes, it's two-part, right? Because it's not just having to react to the times, but the education that goes with that. If you are not someone who is used to managing the digital ecosystem and now your business is dependent on the digital ecosystem, there's a dependency and a deficiency there. There's a deficiency that needs to be addressed. And that's a lot of the work that we do with the Google Digital Coaches Program. So I'm one of 10 coaches at the moment, and the focus is going into brown and Black communities to share resources and tools, primarily leveraging Google resources and tools to be able to grow your business, to be able to feed and nurture your business through the digital ecosystem in order to see growth.
Now,
And mhm.
sorry, but do you think that if, let's say, you're coming to talk to me now, I would need help like that, for example, right? Because I mean,
Mhm.
I use the things, but even though I'm an engineer, I would say I was an engineer before. I'm an engineer from the era of, big box of cards and the big computers. I like to tell my young
Mhm.
friends, I was born before the PC was invented. Okay, so those people say, Dr. Niles, you're supposed to know this. I'm an engineer from the old
Mhm.
school with slide rules.
Mhm.
So when I was the only black female in my class, we weren't talking about
Mhm.
we weren't talking about mentorship. There was nobody ahead of me to mentor me in the first place. So
Right.
we're now talking about somebody like you and others like you who are in the ICT space on the user end, because now we're talking about not the engineer on the back end, but we're talking about the user
Mhm.
interface end, and we're still seeing
Mhm.
gaps in access and gaps in comprehension and gaps. So do you think then that in terms of girls in ICT day, that some of this is more native to the younger people because they are, let's say, growing up, they were born into it? And so as we look at the
Mhm.
future in terms of augmented reality or virtual reality and the
Mhm.
new things that are being designed as we speak, how do you think a place like New York City, where you are, right? We don't have to have all the kids that are
Mhm.
in school online. How do you think that we ought to be talking to the powers that be in the education department, for example, to ensure
Mhm.
that the brown and
Mhm.
black kids in who are minorities in New York are not left behind, because
Mhm.
the classes that they're being taught are not preparing them adequately for
Mhm.
this job? Because that is the question, the gap that we have.
Mhm.
How do you see, as somebody
Yeah.
who's in the room, if you had to now
Mhm.
go and speak to the mayor of New York or the Department of Education, and it's like, hey, I'm doing this for a living. This is the gap I'm seeing in the woman
Mhm.
I'm coaching. Therefore, in high
Mhm.
school, you need to be doing this right now. What would you say to those people?
Mhm. Yeah. So you mentioned several different things that are right on target. The generations that are coming up after us are more digital first. The babies who are being born now will never know, well, will never use the actual landline phone for the most part. They would probably be confused with what cable TV is. As soon as you give them a device, they start scrolling, right? It's like, how'd you know to do that? You're only like one. You've been here for just 12 months. um, so I think that's part of it, right? It's the exposure and the nurture as you're growing up. And I saw this the most in my experience when I got to college. Because college almost, you were away from your household, but you were exposed to people that were coming from all over. So look at what's happening now with homeschooling. You have kids who have never touched a laptop before, but now they're being asked to homeschool. There are kids who are being asked to homeschool that don't have internet access at home. So we didn't even get to the courses yet. We didn't even get to the actual curriculum. We're just getting to the tools that you need to have in order to access. So there's tools, there are just layers. There are multi layers to this disparity that doesn't just start when it's time to get a job, or when it starts, when what college you go to. There's a lot more happening, and there are a lot of things happening within family structures. In the United States, there's systematic oppression that has impacted a lot of these disparities. When you look at communities, black communities specifically. But one way, in terms of just action and things that we can do when we look at our public school system, because those are places, or Black communities, let's look at what we can do from the very beginning so we can better level out the playing field. So if we are looking at the future world, and the future world is digital, we need our kids to be able to manage the digital world, and know how to maneuver it on their own. So I would say it's interesting that now students are being given laptops, but why was that not a consideration before? You know, it's so interesting that it's now a consideration, but at the same time, these are one of the positives of us going through this pandemic, and it's calling out where the loopholes and where the gaps are. Is there an organization out there? Is there a possibility that we can support, sometimes not always by like donating money, but can we donate internet access to homes in underrepresented communities that are also struggling, right? Because just that access to the internet is access to the world.
Yes.
So we have kids quarantined right now in their bubble, don't know what's going on out in the world. So that also impacts, you know, other behavior considerations. You're still going out, you're still hanging out because you don't know that people are actually dying. And to the rate that people are dying and being impacted, you don't have access to the outside world. You just don't know.
You know,
So,
and you said that what popped up for me, you talked about the situation with on the access or lack of access in some forms. Do you think then that if you were to say be able to look at a Google or another big company like that from a strategy standpoint, we should be saying then, you know, we now have also teachers who have never taught in this way before. We should be having a digital coach to teach teachers how to use tools like Google Earth, for example, to teach science and earth science. I mean, how do you think that in the different NGOs that you are part of, I think you are on the board of National Association of Minorities in Communications and all kinds of things like that. So they have some clout. I mean, you by yourself may not have that much clout, but those associations do have some clout. Do you think that a group like that will be able to say to the powers that be, because you are the chapter president, hey, or you're on the board, hey, we have been looking at this, we've been hearing from our family members, and there are 100 of us in this chapter. We're talking at least like 10,000 people, right? We represent. Should we be testing right now a program to ensure, because there's so many women who are teaching our young children, therefore they themselves feel inadequate. That confidence you're talking about, that confidence comes across even the way people teach. So if they don't have the confidence tools, they might be passing on a subliminal fear to their students and subliminal anxiety to their students. How do you think we might, somebody like yourself who is adept and, you know, known in this space could support them in this time? This conversation about helping teachers become more adept that have never been had to teach this way before. With teaching, especially the kids in the primary school, in K through let's say 6, especially. Because you don't want people to pass on that fear because they never taught this way before. What would you say? What, I mean, just thinking out loud, you don't have to be, because I just thought of the question myself. So what would we, what could we do? Because we want this conversation to not only be a conversation, we want this conversation to lead to some action that either you or I could take coming out of it. Because we talked about action before. We're gonna have action.
Right. Yes, I agree with you. So there are several different things. A product marketing strategy is train the trainer. So in this situation, teachers will be the trainers, but they need to be trained in order to train others. And you know, it's so interesting because I was going back and forth with the Department of Ed a few months ago about doing a program for their students, and I was like, okay, that's a good idea, but now you're putting the students in a position where they will know something that their teachers haven't been taught yet. So how about we have a workshop for the teachers first, because then they'll have the know-how, because if the students have questions later on, they'll be going to someone to ask a question that hasn't been trained yet, or we're just assuming already knows because of their position.
Yeah.
So there are two parts to that. I think that's organizational strategy, but I think that's also individuals being aware of the position that they're in to also do professional development and career development, because we all come in at different levels, and we all come into jobs maybe with the ability to do the job, but our exposure and experience also impacts how much we can give to a job. That's any job, really. So teachers also may be knowing where they need additional training, but also the system giving access to resources. And I know that there were trainings, there was maybe like a week or two, I'm not too sure, of training on the online models, or at least there was in certain places before teachers were sent out there to create these online curriculums, because that's a skill set within itself.
Exactly.
It's that if you've never done that before, all of a sudden you are now tasked to create online learning. That is difficult.
Exactly.
I say it's even difficult to, like, because I'm doing these online presentations, for me, it's harder to present online than it is in person. In person, you can see people, you can see their faces and see whether they're getting, they're understanding, you can make that connection. Offline or online, you have to work harder to express yourself, to get your message out there, and then you don't really know when people are getting it. So I think there's training and continuous training that needs to happen. So if I could say action that can be taken now is looking at the Department of Ed, looking at organizations and the powers that be, and hey, coming in and saying, is your force trained and prepared and well equipped to do their job at the best of their ability? You are only as strong as your weakest link. If there's one link that's weak, which can be a teacher that's weak or deficient in certain areas, she might have just now impacted a classroom of 25 to 30 students.
That's a big consideration, and I think I'm certainly in New York City, where your base is. I think about the large numbers of Black immigrants from around the world, quite frankly, that are working class, that are quote unquote out. They actually are essential workers, so they're out right now working. Their children are at home, so even the parents themselves who are
That's
not
another thing too.
Another big gap. So
yeah, you have a lot of students who don't have a parent to, one, log them into that system. If you have a 7-year-old that's never done that before, they need someone to guide them. The laptop arrived in the mail, but I don't know what to do with it. Now add another layer to that, because I'm a child of immigrant parents, and the parents don't even know what to do. The parents never had to work on a laptop, or they check email, but they don't really know how to maneuver things like a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, let alone learn a software to then themselves have to be teachers. Like at a certain point in my education, I had to school myself because my parents were no longer able to. They didn't have the knowledge to. Now, if you add technology to that, that's layers.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I think we sort of answered in this conversation, but I've been thinking through it and thinking, there might be a way for us to really leverage the political clout that exists in the immigrant community in New York to sort of begin to have pilot experiments that can go beyond today crisis, right? Because if we had a PTA, let's call it a parent education movement, so to speak, because we need to make sure they have to make sure the kids are safe online, for example. We know there are lots of trolls around doing things online with kids. So a lot of work that has to be done. This is really, you have opened my eyes with some ideas just talking to you that I hadn't thought about before. And as always, it's important that we get new ideas. I have 2 last questions. When you think about the future and you think about AI taking jobs, as we all are now, AI is going to take all our jobs. We're going to have chatbots, we're going to have robots in hospitals, we're going to have robots cleaning the platforms, etc. When you think about that future, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, that's a good question. I think As an entrepreneur, I thrive in operating in the space of the unknown because I'm also a creative. So I love to create. And I think that to be a good entrepreneur, you have to be able to be somewhat comfortable with the uncomfortableness of like having to build. We're builders because we're building businesses, building or executing on ideas. So one thing that I'm known to say is that nothing is necessarily, things are going to shift and things are going to change, but the jobs of the next 5 and 10 years, they don't exist yet. It's for us to create it. We're driving around, or we're in Ubers. Before the pandemic, we were using Airbnb. So everything our parents told us not to do, we're driving in people's cars and we're sleeping at other people's houses, because technology has enabled us to do so. You don't go into a car with a stranger and whose house is that in what country, but we're doing this, right? And it's so normal to us. But these things didn't exist 10 years ago. The Blockbusters and the Virgin Records and, you know, these things from 10, 15, 20 years ago are no longer here because now we have iTunes, we have this, we have that. CDs don't exist anymore. So it's not that those jobs necessarily don't exist, but it created opportunity for other things. And in this digital space, we can create, and we can create faster and actually create more opportunity than there was before. So I'm not concerned about that at all. And even now with, you know, people are losing their jobs, but there are other jobs that are available, that are becoming available. There are other needs that are becoming available and that are being highlighted. So how my strategic mind thinks is, don't think about what's going away, think about what you can create. And think about how you can even shape, think about even our conversation today, what are the gaps and how you can fill that gap? Because it's you can multiply it. This is a need that can be identified in every state in the United States and in countries around the world. So it's much bigger than New York.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Right, it's much bigger. So if someone could, I don't know, there might be an organization, but there's, you know, there's positives and healthy competition. And obviously we see that there are people who don't have internet access, but if someone can go out and launch an organization or make it more visible today, that goes in and raises funds to be able to pay the monthly internet bill of moms, or you know, who knows? I had a girlfriend in a shelter for a year and I had no idea. I bought her a laptop. I was like, what you need is a laptop. Because that will open up your opportunity to find a job, find an apartment, find things and access to the world. So if there is an organization that can help just bridge that connection from the at-home standpoint to allow education to happen, that right there is a small act with great impact. So what keeps me up at night are all the crazy thoughts and all the ideas that come to my mind for how I can have great impact and change the world, but I know that I myself can't do it as just myself. So that gives me anxiety when things like Corona happens and I was like, oh, think fast. Like, what do you have to do for you and what do you have to do for the people you serve? That's the stuff that keeps me up at night, but it's not concern for lack of jobs. And if you want to make money, you can make money. And we're, you know, Caribbeans and, you know, I say minorities, we can find jobs. We could create jobs.
That's a good attitude. And you are, of course, talking about your company's name is Encounter Your Potential. So
exactly, Encounter Your Potential. And I live it and breathe it.
My last question then is about encountering your potential. I want you to jump 10 years into the future, right? We have managed to survive because by the grace of God, we have been given the gift of life, right?
Yes.
And so we're doing the things that serve your clients. You're building new partnerships. You're seeing the problem, you're navigating the wilderness that we're walking through, and you're seeing problems, you're creating new partnerships with crazy people like me, and we're building. So tell me where Encounter Your Potential, what has Encounter Your Potential done? And in 2030, when we look back, what is the headline say about Encounter Your Potential is X or has done X? What is that headline saying? In your, you said you had all these things in the world you want to change. I'm very much about being a change maker. So tell me about how the world has been blessed, gifted by Encounter Your Potential. What's your headline?
Yeah, that's such a big question. And I think one, I just have to say, and I have to call out, because my husband did ask me, like, what's your goal? And I was like, that's such a good question. What's my goal? Like, what do I want to do with this company? And I said, this isn't the end all for me. There's more. I just don't know what that is yet. But I'm discovering it because I'm still encountering my own potential. But what I do have to say about the people that I come across is that I challenge everyone and anyone who comes in my sphere with an idea, with a business, to move the needle. Whatever you do, move the needle, because you cannot stay in the same place you were. And if you come to me with an idea, I would challenge you to execute it, because that is the differentiation, those who ideate and those who make things happen. So I say move the needle all the time, because I'm also a get-a-doner. I like for things to get done. So I'm encountering my own potential every day. I love Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, because I'm constantly becoming the new version of myself, a better, higher version of myself. And I just challenge us all to continue to become and encounter our max potential, because that is really how we change the world, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. So if there could be a headline in 20, 30 years, I think about legacy a lot, is really that I've been able to impact whatever that big number of people is, because my work is not just for me. I don't work to put money in my pocket, but I work really to be able to change the world and to create a spider web of influence. So I would say that headline would be, she has been able to motivate this number of people to encounter their potential, to move the needle, and to expand or extend just the impact that we're individually able to have, because that's powerful. And it'll be way beyond me sitting here in Harlem, but you know, it can reach people everywhere.
Thank you so much, Sandra Garcia Lowery, CEO of Encounter Your Potential. Your potential for the Sustainable Development Goal 2030 around girls in ICT, I'm going to write it for you. I'm a prophet. Is to Encounter Your Potential has succeeded in driving change, not only in New York City, but across Central America and the Americas, which is of Latin America, by supporting and developing the training of over 100,000 women teachers to understand and be able to train young girls on the digital economy. Partnering with Google, she moved it from her base in New York across the Americas. And so I wanted to thank you in 2030, I'm thanking you now, for your support in helping us to have the dream of multiplying the number of girls in ICT, because those 100,000 teachers that you help get trained have reached 10 million girls. And I want to thank you for that.
I love that. How did you put all of that together?
That's my
How did you put all of that together while we were speaking? I love that.
That's my gift as a futurist. I just want to say thank you so much, Sandra Garcia Lowery, for joining me this morning. Today, as we celebrate or prepare for the celebration of Girls in ICT Day. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the time, and thank you just for the work and impact that you're having and creating.
Yes, folks, we have come to the end of another exciting conversation, and we want to thank you for joining us on Future Sense Now, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. Remember, our future is embedded in the landscape of today, so go out and encounter your potential, seize the future, create the future, and until next time, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.
Thank you for listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson. Future Sense Now is produced by the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Remember, our futures are embedded in the landscape of our present stories. Seize the day, share this story, and share the future.